You've said, "I'm sorry," so many times you don't even hear it anymore. It slips out before you think. It smooths over a bumped shoulder, a late reply, a joke that landed wrong. But strip away the word itself, and something stranger is left standing there. Because your ancestors didn't have that word. No language, no ritual phrase, nothing scripted at all. So when two of them tore into each other over food, or territory, or a broken promise, how did they ever speak again? This is not really a question about words. It's a question about repair. And the answer starts somewhere you wouldn't expect. Not with humans at all, but with our closest living relatives. In the 1970s, a young primatologist named Frans de Waal was watching a colony of chimpanzees at a zoo in the Netherlands. He expected to see conflict. He hadn't expected to see what came right after it. Two chimps who had just been screaming, biting, chasing each other across the enclosure would, minutes later, seek each other out. They'd embrace. They'd groom one another's fur in long, deliberate strokes. De Waal called it reconciliation, and the idea was almost heretical at the time. Animals weren't supposed to have peacemaking behavior. Conflict was assumed to be the end of the story, not the beginning of a second one. But it wasn't the end. It was rarely the end. De Waal's data, and decades of research that followed, showed something remarkable. Primates who reconcile after a fight live in more stable, more cooperative groups. The ones who don't. Reconciliation wasn't a nicety. It was infrastructure. It held the group together well enough to keep everyone fed, protected, and alive. And it wasn't limited to chimpanzees. Researchers went on to document the same basic pattern in bonobos, in macaques, even in ravens, of all things, birds that will preen a former opponent's feathers after a squabble as if nothing happened. The details shifted from species to species. The underlying function never did. Something had to happen after conflict, or the group itself started to come apart at the seams. Which means somewhere back along the evolutionary line, before language, before fire, before anything you'd call culture, the seed of an apology already existed. Not as a sentence, as a behavior, a body moving toward another body instead of away from it. Now fast forward past the chimps, past the ravens, all the way to your own species, and to a stage of life you've probably forgotten entirely, your toddler years. The developmental psychologist Michael Tomasello spent decades studying how very young children learn to cooperate, and what he found is oddly specific. Toddlers under the age of 2 will comfort someone they've upset. They'll pat an arm, offer a toy, look concerned. But they do this without words. Long before they have the language to say anything close to, "I'm sorry." The instinct to repair arrives first. The vocabulary for it arrives years later, almost like a subtitle added on top of a scene that was already playing. So picture your ancestors, tens of thousands of years ago, standing in a small band on some unnamed stretch of land. There is no police force. There is no court. There is no third party to settle a dispute. There is only the group, and the group is the only thing keeping anyone alive. A fight that festers doesn't just hurt two people. It threatens everyone, because a fractured band is a band that can't hunt together, can't watch for predators together, can't survive the next hard winter together. This is the part historians and anthropologists keep circling back to. The anthropologist Christopher Boehm spent years studying small-scale, egalitarian societies, the kind closest in structure to how humans likely lived for most of our history. What he found again and again was a group obsessively focused on keeping the peace. Not because anyone was especially saintly, because the alternative was catastrophic. A band that couldn't repair its own conflicts didn't stay a band for long. So repair had to happen. It just didn't look like what you'd picture. There was no formal moment where someone said the ancient equivalent of "my bad." Instead, repair was physical and it was public. A shared meal after a dispute. A returned object, offered without a word. Sitting close again, when for days you had been sitting far apart. Every one of these was a signal read by the whole group that said, "This is over now. We are still one thing." You can still see fragments of this in small-scale societies that anthropologists have studied more recently. Among some hunter-gatherer groups, a serious dispute wasn't settled by the two people involved at all. It was settled by the whole camp sitting together, sometimes for hours, until an uneasy peace was reached and both sides could eat from the same fire again. The mechanism wasn't confession. It was proximity. Distance meant the wound was still open. Closeness meant it had closed, whether or not a single word of apology was ever spoken. Here's where it gets interesting, because that pattern didn't disappear when language finally arrived. You just got a new layer on top of it. Once humans had words, they had a new tool for repair, but the old tool didn't go away. Words could lie. A gesture, offered in front of the whole group, was much harder to fake. So even after language gave us the ability to say we were sorry, the earliest apologies almost certainly weren't spoken confessions. They were witnessed actions. You didn't just tell the person you'd wronged. You showed the group. This is where the modern psychiatrist Aaron Lazare becomes useful. Lazare spent much of his career studying what actually makes an apology work, and he found something that lines up almost exactly with what anthropologists see in ancient repair rituals. A good apology isn't really about the words at all. It's about acknowledgement, and it's about restoring the other person's sense of worth in front of others. Say the wrong thing sincerely in private and it can still fail. Do the smallest visible gesture in front of the people who matter and it can succeed. Your ancestors, without ever hearing Lazare's name, had already figured this out by instinct tens of thousands of years earlier. So why do you still feel that specific, uncomfortable heat when you have to apologize out loud, in front of someone else, and not just in a text message you can send from a safe distance? Because some part of you still remembers, even if you've never thought about it this way, that an apology was never really private. It was always a performance for the group. Your brain still treats it that way. That's why apologizing to a stranger with no one watching feels almost easy, while apologizing to a partner in front of a friend can feel unbearable. The audience changes the stakes, exactly the way it did around a fire 20,000 years ago. There's a twist here too, and it's an uncomfortable one. Reconciliation research on primates found that it isn't always the guilty party who makes the first move. Sometimes it's the victim. Sometimes it's a completely uninvolved third member of the group, nudging the two apart back toward each other because the group itself can't function while they're at war. Peace, in other words, wasn't always a personal choice. It was sometimes a group demand. You can still feel that pressure today. Think about the last time a mutual friend all but forced two people to sit at the same table and hash it out. Think about how much easier it is to apologize when someone else is quietly pushing you toward the door. That's not a modern social awkwardness. That's an old mechanism still running in the background, still doing exactly what it did for a small band trying not to fall apart. There's also the strange fact that an apology can work even when almost nothing about the underlying conflict has changed. Nothing has been fixed. Nobody has been proven right or wrong. And yet, somehow the tension drains out of the room. Researchers studying forgiveness have pointed out that this only makes sense if you stop thinking of an apology as a transaction and start thinking of it as a signal. It doesn't need to solve the disagreement. It only needs to prove that the relationship still matters more than the disagreement does. That was true around a fire, and it's still true in a group chat. What changed, then, across all those years wasn't the need for repair. It was the form repair took. First, it was a body moving closer instead of further away. Then it was a shared meal, a returned object, a public gesture nobody could fake. Eventually it became a word, but the word only worked because it was standing on top of everything that came before it. Strip away the language, and the apology you gave this morning is doing the exact same job a chimpanzee's outstretched hand was doing millions of years ago. It's telling the group and the person that the bond is worth more than the fight. This is also why a bad apology feels so instantly, viscerally wrong, even when it technically contains the right word. You know the kind. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry if that upset you. The word is there. The repair is not. And something ancient in you clocks the difference immediately, faster than you could ever explain it out loud. Lazare's research found the same pattern in clinical settings. People can tell almost instantly whether an apology is acknowledging real harm or just performing the shape of one. Your ancestors could tell too. A gesture offered grudgingly, with the body angled slightly away, never carried the same weight as one offered fully. The words changed. The test underneath them didn't. Think about that the next time you're drafting a text message apology and deleting it 3 times before sending it. You're not just choosing words. You're instinctively trying to pass a test that predates language itself, one your whole nervous system already knows how to grade, even if you've never once thought about where that instinct came from. So the next time the words come out fast and automatic, notice what's actually happening underneath them. You're not just clearing your conscience. You're performing an ancient, load-bearing act that every human group before you depended on to survive. Ancient humans didn't need the word sorry to know how to apologize. They just needed to move toward each other instead of away. You've said, "I'm sorry," so many times you don't even hear it anymore. But somewhere underneath the word, your ancestors are still the ones speaking.